De la fan story intro hon, chin theo dung ka truck ben ka. Edit she fired a single dad. Until 10 black SUVs rolled in, and she fell silent. What could possibly happen after a single father is fired? And why would 10 black SUVs arrive at that exact moment? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're here for another unforgettable story. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful, heartfelt journeys like this one. Thank you for watching, for being part of this community, and for supporting the channel every step of the way. Now we'd love to hear from you. What was your very first thought when you read this title? With that, let's step into the story and discover how one ordinary moment changed everything. You're applauding the wrong decision. The words floated across the polished marble lobby just as the applause began. Ethan Brooks didn't raise his voice when the security badge slipped from his fingers onto the reception desk. He didn't argue. He didn't demand another chance. He simply looked at the woman who had ended 8 years of loyal work with a signature and a cold expression that suggested his life could be summarized in a single sentence. Victoria Hayes folded her hands with practiced confidence. This company rewards performance, not excuses. A few employees exchanged awkward glances before joining the polite applause started by one ambitious manager eager to impress the CEO. Others looked away, relieved it wasn't happening to them. Ethan bent down, picked up the framed photograph that had been sitting beside his computer for years, and brushed an invisible speck of dust from the glass. In the picture, his daughter Lily smiled with 2 missing front teeth while clutching a melting vanilla ice cream cone at the county fair. The corners of Ethan's mouth lifted into the smallest smile. "Dad," Lily's voice echoed from his phone through a scheduled reminder that flashed across the screen. "Ice cream after work. 6 o'clock. Don't be late." His thumb rested on the notification for a moment before he quietly locked the screen. Losing a job was painful. Breaking a promise to his little girl felt impossible. Around him, conversations resumed as though nothing important had happened. Someone laughed near the elevators. Another employee whispered that this was what happened when people couldn't keep up anymore. Ethan heard every word, yet none of them changed the calm expression on his face. There was something unusual about him. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't pride. It was the strange peace of a man who had already survived days much darker than this one. His wife had been gone for 3 years. Hospital hallways had taught him what real fear looked like. Sleepless nights beside a frightened child had taught him patience. Compared to those memories, public humiliation felt surprisingly small. He picked up the worn backpack that held his lunch container, a folded sweatshirt for Lily in case the evening turned cool, and an old notebook filled with careful handwriting no one at the company had ever bothered to read. Victoria watched him leave without another glance. In her mind, the meeting scheduled for the next hour mattered far more than one dismissed employee disappearing through the revolving doors. Outside, warm summer sunlight reflected across rows of expensive cars filling the executive parking lot. Ethan paused for only a second, taking a slow breath before walking toward the city sidewalk instead of looking back. He never noticed several people across the street quietly lowering their phones after watching him leave. And 42 minutes later, the first black SUV rolled into the company's front entrance. The neighborhood ice cream shop sat on the corner of Maple Avenue exactly where it had been for nearly 40 years, and Ethan smiled the moment he spotted Lily waiting on the wooden bench outside with her small backpack resting beside her sneakers. The instant she saw him, she jumped to her feet and ran straight into his arms without asking a single question about his day. "You are 3 minutes early," she said proudly, holding up the inexpensive children's watch he had given her for her 8th birthday. Ethan laughed softly. "Then I guess I finally beat the clock." Lily narrowed her eyes with playful suspicion. "You sound different." Ethan gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe I am just hungry for ice cream." She accepted the answer with the simple trust that only children seemed able to possess. Inside, the familiar smell of fresh waffle cones and vanilla filled the little shop, while an elderly couple shared a banana split near the window. Ethan counted the bills inside his wallet before stepping to the counter. It was less money than he expected to have this morning, but it was still enough for 2 scoops and 1 extra cherry, because Lily always smiled when she saw it. As they sat together by the front window, she happily described her science project, her best friend's new puppy, and the book her teacher had started reading aloud that afternoon. Ethan listened carefully, asking questions, laughing at the right moments, never allowing the weight of the afternoon to reach her shoulders. Every promise he had ever made to himself centered on this little girl. She deserved evenings filled with laughter instead of worry. Halfway through her chocolate cone, Lily tilted her head. Did something happen at work? Ethan paused for only a heartbeat before answering. Sometimes grown-ups discover that one door closes. She looked at him seriously. Does another one open? Ethan smiled, surprised by the question. That is usually how life works. She nodded as though that explanation settled everything. Outside the large front window, traffic drifted past in the golden light of early evening. Ethan noticed a black sport utility vehicle slowly passing the shop before continuing down the street. A few moments later, another identical vehicle followed. Then another. Lily noticed them too. That is funny, she whispered. They all look exactly the same. Ethan glanced outside for barely a second before returning his attention to her melting ice cream cone. Probably someone important in town. He had no reason to think otherwise. Across the city, however, the line of identical black vehicles continued, turning one after another into the headquarters parking lot. Employees standing near the entrance stopped there. Conversations. Receptionists pressed against the glass windows. Even Victoria Hayes interrupted her executive meeting when someone quietly entered the conference room and whispered that unexpected visitors had arrived without appointments. She frowned, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the lobby expecting to greet powerful investors. Instead, every person inside the building watched in complete silence as the 10th black sport utility vehicle came to a smooth stop directly in front of the main entrance, and every suited passenger remained seated as though they were waiting for only one person who was no longer there. Victoria Hayes had negotiated billion-dollar contracts without allowing her pulse to change, yet the silence in the lobby unsettled her in a way she could not explain. 10 identical black sport utility vehicles stood perfectly aligned outside the glass entrance, their engines idling with quiet precision. No company logos, no government markings, just polished black paint reflecting the afternoon sun. Employees gathered near the reception desk, whispering theories that changed every few seconds. Maybe it is a federal audit. Maybe investors are buying the company. Maybe someone famous is coming. Victoria adjusted her jacket and stepped toward the revolving doors with the confident smile that had impressed board members for years. The first vehicle door opened. A middle-aged man in a tailored navy suit stepped onto the sidewalk. He looked around carefully before checking his watch. Instead of walking inside, he remained beside the vehicle. Then another passenger exited from the second sport utility vehicle. Then another. Within moments, several professionally dressed men and women stood in formation, speaking quietly into wireless earpieces. None of them appeared nervous. None appeared impatient. They simply waited. Victoria extended her hand with practiced confidence. Welcome to Hayes Technologies. I am Victoria Hayes. How may we help you today? The man closest to her acknowledged the greeting with a polite nod, but did not shake her hand. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. We are looking for Ethan Brooks. Her smile barely changed, although something inside her hesitated. Mr. Brooks is no longer employed here. The man exchanged a brief glance with one of his colleagues. When did that happen? Approximately 45 minutes ago. For the first time, genuine disappointment crossed his face. He lowered his eyes for a second before speaking again. That is unfortunate. Victoria folded her arms. May I ask why so many people are looking for one former employee? The man remained respectful, yet his answer revealed almost nothing. I am afraid I cannot discuss that at this time. Around them, every nearby conversation stopped. Managers who had applauded Ethan's dismissal now stared through the lobby windows with growing uncertainty. The receptionist quietly remembered the old notebook Ethan carried out every evening and suddenly wondered why someone so ordinary had inspired such an extraordinary visit. Upstairs, members of the executive team began calling one another, each hoping someone else understood what was happening. Nobody did. Across town, Ethan and Lily walked slowly through a neighborhood park, sharing the last bites of her ice cream before tossing the empty cups into a recycling bin. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, while children laughed on the playground nearby. Lily slipped her small hand into his. Can we feed the ducks before we go home? she asked. Ethan smiled. Of course. He still had no idea that his name was echoing through conference rooms, security offices, and executive phone calls across the city. Back at headquarters, the suited visitor finally turned toward Victoria once more. Ms. Hayes, he said calmly, if you have any way to reach Mr. Brooks immediately, I strongly recommend that you do. Waiting until tomorrow may cost more than anyone in this building realizes. Victoria Hayes had built her reputation on reading people within minutes. Yet Ethan Brooks suddenly felt like the one file she had never truly opened. She walked briskly toward the executive conference room with the visitors following at a respectful distance, while department heads hurried behind them, their confident expressions replaced by quiet concern. Someone explain this, Victoria said as the doors closed. No one answered. The senior visitor placed a slim leather folder on the polished table, but kept one hand resting on it. Before we continue, I need to ask a simple question. Did Ethan Brooks leave voluntarily? Victoria held his gaze. No. His position was terminated this afternoon. The room grew noticeably quieter. The man slowly nodded, as though confirming the one answer he had hoped not to hear. Then I suggest we find him immediately. Victoria crossed her arms. You still have not explained why. The visitor opened the folder just enough to remove a single document without revealing the others. He slid it across the table. It was not a contract. It was not a legal notice. It was a recommendation letter signed by some of the most respected leaders in the technology industry, each praising Ethan's judgment, integrity, and rare ability to solve problems others considered impossible. Several names were instantly recognizable even to the executives sitting around the table. Victoria frowned. These cannot be authentic. They are, the visitor replied calmly. Every signature has been verified. One executive leaned forward in disbelief. If this is true, why was he working here as a systems analyst? The visitor smiled faintly. Because he chose to. Those 5 words landed harder than anyone expected. Victoria replayed countless meetings in her mind. Ethan had never competed for attention. He had never corrected anyone publicly. When younger employees struggled, he quietly stayed late to help them without recording overtime. When projects failed, he fixed problems before sunrise without asking for recognition. She remembered dismissing his suggestions more than once because they had come from someone she believed lacked ambition. Suddenly those memories no longer felt ordinary. Who exactly is he? She asked. The visitor paused before answering. That is his story to tell, not mine. Frustration flashed across Victoria's face. You are asking me to find a man while refusing to explain why he matters. No, the visitor answered gently. I am asking you to find a good man before someone else does. Across town, Ethan sat beside Lily on a wooden bench overlooking the duck pond. The evening sun painted golden reflections across the water while she scattered small pieces of bread, laughing every time another duck hurried closer. Ethan watched her smile and felt, for the first time that day, the tension in his shoulders begin to fade. Losing a job hurt, but moments like this reminded him what success had always meant. His phone remained silent inside his jacket pocket because he had switched it to Do Not Disturb while spending time with Lily. He never noticed the growing list of missed calls waiting for him. Back inside Hayes Technologies, the receptionist suddenly remembered something Ethan had left behind. Without saying a word, she hurried toward his former desk, opened the top drawer, and found the worn notebook he had forgotten to pack. When she carefully opened the first page, every person standing beside her fell completely silent. The receptionist carefully carried Ethan's worn notebook into the conference room as though it were something fragile. Nobody expected much from an old spiral notebook with faded corners and coffee stains along the cover. Victoria accepted it with visible skepticism before opening the first page. Instead of random notes, she found detailed diagrams, handwritten calculations, and practical solutions to technical failures the company had struggled with for years. Every page was dated. Every problem had been analyzed. Every solution included clear explanations written in plain language so anyone could understand them. One executive leaned closer. This cannot be possible. Another quietly turned several pages. These are the same issues our consultants have been charging us millions of dollars to study. The room fell silent again. Ethan had never presented these ideas during executive meetings because nobody had ever asked to see them. Whenever he submitted recommendations through normal channels, they disappeared beneath layers of management. Victoria slowly remembered several emails she had dismissed without reading beyond the first paragraph because they came from someone outside senior leadership. Her confidence began giving way to something unfamiliar. Regret. The senior visitor studied the notebook with unmistakable respect. This looks exactly like his work. Victoria looked up immediately. You have seen his research before. The visitor nodded. Not this notebook. But this way of thinking is unmistakable. He carefully closed the cover and slid it back across the table. Mr. Brooks has a habit of solving difficult problems quietly while allowing others to take the credit if it helps the project succeed. No one spoke for several long seconds. Down the hallway, employees who had applauded Ethan's dismissal now watched managers rushing between offices, making urgent phone calls that grew more desperate by the minute. Human Resources searched personnel files. Information Technology attempted to recover archived reports. Administrative assistants tried calling every emergency contact listed in Ethan's records. Each attempt led nowhere because his phone remained on silent. Meanwhile, Ethan and Lily slowly walked home beneath rows of maple trees glowing in the warm evening light. Lily skipped ahead, collecting smooth stones from the sidewalk and proudly announcing that each one looked like a tiny heart. Ethan smiled every time she held another one up for inspection. The weight of losing his job still rested quietly inside him, but it never reached his face while she was watching. He had promised himself years ago that his daughter would never feel responsible for carrying adult burdens. As they reached their modest house, Lily slipped one of the little stones into his hand. This one is for good luck, she said. Ethan laughed softly. I think having you already makes me pretty lucky. She grinned and hurried inside to finish her homework. Ethan placed the small stone on the kitchen windowsill beside a framed photograph of his late wife, then finally noticed the blinking notification light on his phone. 12 missed calls, 7 voicemail messages, 3 text messages from unknown numbers. Before he could unlock the screen, another unfamiliar number appeared. He hesitated for a brief moment before answering. The calm voice on the other end said only one sentence. Mr. Brooks, we have been trying to find you all afternoon because the opportunity you walked away from today was never the one we came to offer. The voice on the telephone remained calm, almost gentle, as though the person understood that timing mattered more than urgency. Mr. Brooks, my name is Daniel Carter. I apologize for interrupting your evening with your daughter. Ethan glanced toward the dining room, where Lily sat coloring quietly at the kitchen table. She always comes first, he answered without hesitation. Daniel smiled faintly on the other end of the line. That is exactly what everyone told me you would say. Ethan frowned. I think you have the wrong impression of me. Actually, Daniel replied, I believe we finally have the correct one. Ethan stepped onto the back porch so Lily would not overhear the conversation. The evening air carried the scent of fresh grass, while wind chimes moved softly above the porch railing. Can you please explain why so many people have been trying to reach me? There was a brief silence before Daniel answered. 3 years ago, you quietly declined an executive position with our organization. Ethan looked toward the fading sunset. That was a long time ago. Yes, Daniel said. You declined because your wife had just been diagnosed with a serious illness. You told us your family needed you more than your career did. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. He had almost forgotten that interview. Almost. After she passed away, Daniel continued gently. We respected your request for privacy. We agreed that if the right opportunity ever came again, we would personally ask one more time. That time is now. Ethan rested one hand against the porch railing. There are many people more qualified than I am. Daniel answered immediately. Every report we have received over the last 3 years says the opposite. Inside the house, Lily looked through the kitchen window and smiled when she saw her father. He smiled back before returning his attention to the call. I appreciate your confidence, but I do not understand why this could not wait until tomorrow. Daniel hesitated before speaking. Because another company has already begun searching for you. Tonight. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Hayes Technologies? Yes. Ethan quietly laughed to himself. That is unexpected. Mr. Brooks, Daniel said, this is not about proving anyone wrong. We are calling because your character impressed us even more than your professional ability. Every person we interviewed described the same pattern. You never chased titles. You never demanded recognition. You simply solved problems and helped people succeed. Ethan looked through the window again. Lily had placed 2 mugs on the table, one filled with warm milk for herself and the other waiting for him. She waved happily when she noticed him watching. "Can I ask one favor?" Ethan said softly. "Of course," Daniel replied. "Whatever decision I make, I need tonight to belong to my daughter. She has already lost one parent. She should never lose time with the other because of business." Daniel answered without the slightest disappointment. "Then we will wait. Family has always been the reason we wanted you in the first place." After the call ended, Ethan slipped his phone back into his pocket and walked inside with the same quiet smile Lily had known all her life. Hundreds of yards away, however, inside the brightly lit executive offices of Hayes Technologies, Victoria Hayes received a new message that caused the color to drain from her face. It contained only one sentence from her board chairman: "Do whatever it takes to find Ethan Brooks before sunrise." Victoria Hayes had not left her office since sunset. The city lights shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but she no longer noticed the skyline she had once admired every evening. Her attention remained fixed on Ethan Brooks's personnel file, now surrounded by handwritten notes, copies of forgotten project reports, and the weathered notebook that had quietly rewritten everything she believed she knew about him. Every new document uncovered another uncomfortable truth. Projects that had saved the company millions of dollars carried someone else's signature, yet the original technical drafts matched Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. Critical software failures had been resolved overnight after he volunteered to stay late, but official recognition had gone to department managers who never corrected the record. One by one, executives began admitting things they had overlooked. "He trained half my team when they were new. He stayed after hours to help us prepare for audits. He never asked for credit." Each confession made the room quieter than the last. Victoria slowly leaned back in her chair, remembering the confidence with which she had dismissed him only hours earlier. She had mistaken humility for a lack of ambition, silence for weakness, and kindness for ordinary competence. For the first time in years, she questioned her own judgment more than anyone else's. Across town, Ethan tucked Lily into bed with the same bedtime routine they had followed since she was 5 years old. They read one chapter from her favorite adventure book, laughed at the same funny sentence they had laughed at dozens of times before, and ended with the same promise: "Tomorrow will be another good day." Lily smiled sleepily. Even if today was not, Ethan gently pulled the blanket over her shoulders. Especially then. She reached for his hand before closing her eyes. "You always make things better, Dad." Ethan waited until her breathing became slow and peaceful before quietly turning off the bedside lamp. He paused outside her bedroom door for a moment, listening to the comforting silence that filled the little house. It reminded him why every difficult decision he had ever made had been worth making. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter sat inside, one of the black sport utility vehicles parked several streets away. He had instructed every member of his team to remain out of sight. "No one approaches the house tonight," he said calmly. "Mr. Brooks asked for time with his daughter. We will honor that request." One younger associate looked surprised. "Even if another company reaches him first?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "Respect is worth more than urgency. If we cannot respect the man before he joins us, then we do not deserve him afterward." The vehicle grew silent. At that same moment, Victoria received another call from the chairman of the board. His voice carried none of its usual confidence. "I have just finished speaking with 3 industry leaders," he said quietly. "Do you know what every one of them asked me?" Victoria swallowed. "What?" There was a long pause before he answered. "They all wanted to know why we were careless enough to let Ethan Brooks walk out of our building." Victoria slowly closed her eyes. For the first time that day, she realized the greatest loss was not the employee she had fired. It was the trust of a man who had never once given her a reason to doubt him, and she had no idea whether that trust could ever be earned back. The first light of morning had barely reached the quiet neighborhood when a familiar line of black sport utility vehicles stopped several houses away instead of pulling into Ethan's driveway. Daniel Carter stepped out alone, carrying nothing except a small leather portfolio. He had promised that family would come first, and he intended to keep that promise. Inside the modest home, Ethan was preparing pancakes while Lily carefully arranged blueberries into the shape of a smiling face on her plate. "Dad," she said with a grin, "today already looks better than yesterday." Ethan smiled warmly. Sometimes the best mornings arrive after the hardest afternoons. A gentle knock sounded at the front door. Ethan opened it to find Daniel waiting with calm patience rather than urgency. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks. Thank you for seeing me." Ethan stepped outside, quietly closing the door behind him so Lily could finish breakfast. "You came yourself." Daniel nodded. Some conversations deserve respect instead of conference rooms. He handed Ethan the leather portfolio. Inside was a formal offer unlike any Ethan had expected. It described a leadership role focused not only on innovation but also on mentoring young engineers, building ethical teams, and creating opportunities for people whose potential had been overlooked. Ethan read every page carefully without speaking. "The compensation is generous," he finally said, "but that is not what catches my attention." Daniel smiled. "I hoped you would notice the rest." Ethan pointed to one sentence near the end. The position guaranteed flexible hours for family commitments, school events, medical appointments, vacations, even unexpected moments that mattered more than meetings. "Who wrote this?" Ethan asked. "Our board insisted on it," Daniel replied. "After learning why you declined us 3 years ago, they agreed that no career should require someone to choose between excellence at work and love at home." Ethan remained silent for several thoughtful seconds. Across the street, another vehicle approached much more quickly before stopping at the curb. Victoria Hayes stepped out alone. She looked nothing like the confident executive from the previous afternoon. There were no assistants beside her, no security team, and no carefully rehearsed smile. She simply walked forward until she stood a respectful distance away. "Mr. Brooks," she said quietly, "may I have a moment?" Ethan looked toward Daniel, who answered with a polite nod before stepping back to provide privacy. Victoria took a slow breath. "I spent all night reading reports, speaking with employees, and discovering how much I failed to see. I judged your value by your position instead of your character. I dismissed your ideas before I understood them. Yesterday, I thought I was protecting my company. Instead, I damaged it." Ethan listened without interrupting. She lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. "I came to apologize, not because someone told me to, but because it is the right thing to do. I cannot undo what happened yesterday. I only hope you will believe that I truly regret it." Ethan looked at the quiet neighborhood around them before answering. "An apology has value when it comes with honesty. Thank you for giving me that." Victoria nodded, visibly relieved even though she knew forgiveness did not erase consequences. "If there is anything I can do to make this right, I will." Ethan smiled gently. "Then start by looking more carefully at the people who are still working for you. There are probably others you have not truly seen yet." Victoria stood speechless as those words settled into the morning air, realizing that the greatest lesson Ethan offered had nothing to do with business at all. Several months later, the little house on Maple Avenue still looked exactly the same from the outside. The porch swing still creaked gently in the afternoon breeze. The flower box beneath the front window still held the bright yellow daisies that Lily insisted on watering herself. Success had changed Ethan's career, but it had never changed the life he wanted to build. Every morning he still packed Lily's lunch, walked her to school whenever his schedule allowed, and reminded her that kindness was something people practiced, not something they talked about. His new office overlooked the city skyline, yet his favorite place remained the small kitchen where father and daughter shared breakfast before the day began. At his new company, Ethan quietly transformed the culture the same way he had solved every difficult problem throughout his life. New employees were paired with experienced mentors instead of being left to struggle alone. Good ideas were recognized no matter whose name appeared on the identification badge. Team meetings became conversations instead of competitions. Within weeks, productivity improved, but what impressed the board even more was something no report could fully measure. People smiled more. They stayed longer. They trusted one another. Daniel Carter often watched those changes with quiet satisfaction. "You never tried to build a better company first," he told Ethan one afternoon. "You built better relationships, and the company followed." Ethan simply smiled. People always come before numbers. Across town, Hayes Technologies was changing as well. Victoria Hayes kept her promise. She reviewed every overlooked recommendation sitting in forgotten files. She invited junior employees to speak during executive meetings. She personally introduced a recognition program that rewarded teamwork, integrity, and quiet leadership instead of only visible results. One afternoon, she gathered the entire company in the lobby where Ethan had once walked away carrying nothing except a backpack and a photograph of Lily. Looking at the employees before her, she spoke without prepared notes. The greatest mistake I ever made was believing that titles reveal character. They do not. Character reveals itself long before titles ever appear. No one applauded immediately. They simply listened. The silence carried more respect than applause ever could. That evening, Victoria mailed a handwritten letter to Ethan. It contained no business proposal and no request for another meeting. It simply thanked him for teaching her a lesson that success alone never had. Ethan placed the letter inside the same worn notebook that had quietly followed him through every chapter of his journey. When Lily noticed it, she smiled. "Is that another good luck note?" Ethan looked at the little heart-shaped stone she had given him weeks earlier, still resting on the kitchen windowsill beside his late wife's photograph. "Something like that," he answered softly. Lily slipped her hand into his as they watched the sunset paint the sky with warm shades of gold. Neither of them spoke for several peaceful moments because not every victory needed words. Sometimes the strongest voice was quiet dignity. Sometimes the greatest success was keeping the promises made to the people who mattered most. And sometimes the world finally discovered what had always been true. Respect costs nothing, but failing to give it can cost everything.